burned hot, and the air carried that uneasy hum that comes just before history takes a turn. Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, her voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet. With a smirk curling across her face, she hurled the insult like a weapon. "Why don't you just go back to India?" The impact was instant. A gasp rippled through the audience, sharp and involuntary, as though the entire room had been struck at once. Some covered their mouths, others shook their heads in disbelief, and in that fraction of a second, silence swallowed the chamber. It wasn't just an insult, it was an unveiling, an echo of the ugliest corners of American politics laid bare for the world to see. The cameras froze on Kash Patel's face. His eyes didn't flinch. No quick retort, no visible anger, just stillness, the kind that makes every second feel heavier than the last. And as that silence stretched, as Leavitt's smirk hardened into something closer to defiance, the nation held its breath. Because everyone watching knew exactly what had just been said, and yet they couldn't believe it had been spoken aloud. It wasn't simply a comment about heritage. It was a challenge to belonging itself. It was a dismissal of every sacrifice made by generations who came to this country with nothing but faith in its promise. And in that one venomous sentence, Leavitt had drawn a line in the sand, who she believed was truly American and who was not. The cameras cut wider, capturing the stunned faces of the audience. A young man shook his head in disbelief. A woman whispered, "Did she really just say that?" Across social media feeds, clips began to circulate in real time, spreading outrage before the debate had even ended. Narration cut in, low and deliberate, underscoring the gravity of the moment. That single sentence ignited a storm that would rock American politics. Every eye turned to Kash Patel. Every microphone leaned closer, waiting for his response. But in that heavy silence, something powerful was already unfolding. It wasn't just about what he would say. It was about what America would see in him when he did. And then, he leaned into the microphone. But no one expected what Kash Patel said next. The debate had been advertised as a routine policy clash, another night of rehearsed talking points and partisan sparring. But the moment Karoline Leavitt's words cut through the air, the event transformed into something else entirely. This wasn't about tax plans or committee budgets anymore. This was about who belonged in America and who had the authority to decide. The stage was framed with the familiar trappings of televised politics. Glossy banners, perfectly arranged chairs, and a moderator trying desperately to hold the center. Yet, after the insult, none of that mattered. The room itself became a battleground, a mirror reflecting the fault lines of the nation. On one side sat Karoline, chin lifted with defiance, embodying a strain of politics that thrived on exclusion. On the other sat Kash Patel, calm, composed, and suddenly carrying the weight of millions who saw their own identities challenged in those four words. Because this wasn't just about him, it was about every immigrant who had ever been told they didn't belong. Every child who had been mocked for their accent, their food, or their last name. Every family that had built a life in America only to be reminded, again and again, that their skin, their culture, their faith would always mark them as outsiders in the eyes of some. The moderator shifted nervously, sensing the magnitude of the moment but powerless to stop it. The audience, too, understood the stakes. You could see it in their faces, some nodding quietly in solidarity with Kash, others folding their arms in stubborn silence, unwilling to confront the ugliness laid bare before them. Across the nation, living rooms flickered with the broadcast. Families sat forward, stunned that such a naked insult had been spoken on live television in the year 2025. Phones lit up with texts. "Did you hear that? She really said it." Outrage collided with disbelief, and disbelief gave way to a deeper question. What does it mean to be American today? For decades, America has wrestled with that question. From Ellis Island to the southern border, from civil rights marches to travel bans, the struggle over belonging has never truly ended. Racism and nativism have always resurfaced, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, but always present. And here it was again, distilled into a single moment. Leavitt's words crystallizing centuries of prejudice into one smirk, one insult, one televised attack. And yet the insult also unlocked something else. It turned the debate from political theater into a moral crucible. Because if Kash Patel chose to remain silent, the narrative would belong to her. But if he answered, if he rose above the venom and spoke with truth, then his words had the potential to ripple far beyond that stage. Every second ticked heavier than the last. The insult was not just a wound to him. It was a challenge to the millions watching who carried stories like his. Could dignity defeat disdain? Could calm truth overpower cruelty? Narration pressed the question deeper. This was no longer a debate about policy. This was a test of identity, of belonging, of the very meaning of Americanness. And as the cameras kept rolling, the stakes only grew higher. To understand the venom in Karoline Leavitt's words, you have to understand the story she tells about herself. She rose quickly through the ranks of conservative politics, branding herself as fearless, unapologetic, and unbothered by political correctness. At just 25, she was already making headlines, praised by allies as the next torchbearer of the right. Her speeches were laced with soundbites that thrived in the age of social media, short, sharp jabs designed to provoke outrage and applause in equal measure. Leavitt built her image on defiance. She positioned herself as the young fighter unafraid to call out liberal elites, as the voice of a generation supposedly tired of compromise. At rallies, she wrapped herself in the flag declaring she was standing up for real Americans, the silent majority who had been ignored for too long. But beneath that polished branding was a pattern, an unmistakable thread of rhetoric that drew lines between who counted as American and who did not. She spoke often of American values, but her definition seemed narrow, exclusionary. In one breath, she praised the grit of hard-working families. In the next, she mocked the very immigrants who embodied that grit through sacrifice and survival. She invoked the Constitution as sacred, but dismissed the diverse voices who fought to expand its promises. Her version of patriotism wasn't about unity. It was about walls, borders, and division. This contradiction was her trademark. To her supporters, it was refreshing candor. To critics, it was coded bigotry dressed in patriotic colors. And over time, the mask began to slip. The quips grew sharper, the barbs more personal. She seemed to revel in the backlash, measuring her success not by the substance of her arguments but by the volume of her critics. The more outrage she provoked, the more she claimed victory. Karoline's cote and pausania, embate of style earned her airtime and attention, but it also revealed an arrogance that bordered on reckless. She dismissed opponents with smirks, interrupted with sneers, and leaned on insults when arguments fell thin. In every televised appearance, she carried herself less like a public servant and more like a performer whose audience demanded confrontation above all else. Her defenders insisted she was simply saying what others were afraid to say. They called her authentic, but authenticity without empathy is just cruelty in costume. And cruelty, however cleverly packaged, always exposes itself in the end. The insult hurled at Kash Patel was not an accident of speech. It was the logical outcome of a political career built on division. When she told him to go back to India, she wasn't improvising. She was reaching for the same old playbook, one that weaponized identity and caste difference as a threat. What she didn't realize in that moment was how drastically the game had changed. Because this time, the cameras weren't just recording another controversial quip. This time, the insult wasn't disappearing into the noise of the news cycle. It was too raw, too blatant, too ugly to ignore. Viewers didn't hear a clever punchline. They heard the voice of a politician drawing the circle of American identity smaller, tighter, meaner. And something else made this moment different. Kash Patel was not the kind of opponent who rattled easily. He had faced tougher challenges, weathered bigger storms. His composure wasn't just a personal trait. It was the product of a life lived on the fault line between exclusion and belonging. Leavitt thought her insult would weaken him, but it only highlighted her own fragility. Karoline Leavitt had always thrived in conflict. She counted on her opponents losing their temper, stumbling into anger, giving her the viral clip she wanted. But on that stage, she miscalculated. Her arrogance blinded her to the power of calm, steady dignity. And as the seconds ticked after her insult, as the silence stretched across the stage, long before his name appeared in headlines, Kash Patel's story was being written in the quiet sacrifices of his parents. They arrived in America from India with little more than determination in their pockets and hope in their hearts. They worked jobs that demanded long hours and humble patience. His father in manufacturing, his mother balancing work while raising a family in a country that was not always welcoming. Every dollar saved was a step forward. Every small victory proof that their choice to leave everything behind had meaning. For Kash, childhood was a balancing act between two worlds. At home, the smell of Indian spices filled the kitchen, stories of his parents' homeland echoing through conversations. Outside, he was confronted with the reality that his skin color, his name, and his heritage made him different in ways classmates were quick to point out. He heard the jokes, he endured the slurs. He learned early what it meant to be told he didn't belong, but instead of hardening, he grew steadier. Instead of letting bitterness take root, he carried those experiences as quiet fuel. School became his sanctuary and his proving ground. Kash excelled, not because it was easy, but because his parents had instilled in him the idea that education was not just a path, it was a responsibility. Their sacrifices demanded his effort. He pushed through every barrier, graduated with distinction, and chose a path of service rather than comfort. Law, justice, public duty, these were not careers for him, they were callings. As he entered government service, Kash's calm, composed manner set him apart. He wasn't a firebrand shouting for attention. He was the one who listened carefully, spoke deliberately, and grounded his arguments in principle rather than spectacle. Colleagues noticed. Even in the most heated rooms, he carried himself with a steadiness that disarmed opponents. His presence reminded people that patriotism wasn't about volume, it was about values. That patriotism was never abstract for Kash. It was personal. He saw America not through the lens of entitlement, but through the lens of gratitude. His family had chosen this country. They had endured struggle to stand beneath its flag. For him, defending America's democratic ideals was not a political stance. It was a way of honoring their sacrifices. Every time he walked into a courtroom, every time he sat at a policy table, he carried their journey with him. And yet, even with his accomplishments, the echoes of exclusion never disappeared entirely. He knew what it felt like to be underestimated, to be dismissed because of his background. He remembered the teachers who doubted him, the peers who mocked his heritage, the sideways glances in airports, the assumptions that he was less American. Each slight carved deeper into his understanding of what so many immigrants endure. Each wound built resilience, and an unshakable conviction that dignity was worth more than disdain. That conviction made him different from politicians like Karoline Leavitt. Where she saw division as leverage, he saw unity as strength. Where she used insults to elevate herself, he used composure to elevate the moment. His story wasn't about dominance, it was about perseverance. His strength came not from belittling others, but from proving again and again that grace could withstand cruelty. It was this journey, stitched together by struggle and sacrifice, that shaped the man seated across from Leavitt on that stage. He wasn't just defending himself in that moment. He was carrying the voices of countless Americans who had heard the same insult in different forms. He was speaking for families who worked invisible jobs, for children who were told their dreams were too foreign, for generations who had poured their labor and love into a nation that didn't always love them back. That is why his silence in those first seconds after the insult mattered so much. It wasn't weakness, it was strength held. The silence after Leavitt's insult was heavy enough to press against the walls. The moderator shifted in his seat, fumbling with his notes, desperate for a way to move the debate forward. But before he could intervene, Karoline doubled down. She leaned back with a smirk, her voice dripping with condescension. "See, he won't even answer. That tells you everything you need to know. Some people just don't respect this country the way real Americans do." The jab was sharper than the first. Gasps turned into murmurs. A few in the audience applauded, but the sound was weak, drowned out by disbelieving whispers. Commentators seated on the sidelines exchanged nervous glances. This was no longer a debate they could neatly summarize later. This was political theater combusting in real time, the kind of moment that could redefine reputations forever. Karoline mistook Kash's calm silence for weakness. She mistook his patience for hesitation, and with each passing second, her arrogance grew. She leaned forward as if daring him to respond, her smirk widening, her words hanging in the air like bait. "What's wrong, Kash? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you just don't have an answer." The tension was unbearable. The moderator opened his mouth, then closed it again, sensing that any interruption now would only look like cowardice. Viewers at home sat on the edge of their seats, the collective question reverberating. Would Kash Patel finally break? But he didn't. He sat upright, his expression unflinching, his eyes fixed, not on her smirk, not on the provocation, but somewhere steadier, deeper. His stillness was louder than her insults. Every pause, every breath stretched the moment, forcing the audience to lean in closer. Commentators scribbled frantic notes, cameras zoomed in, and the air carried a tension that felt less like politics and more like history unfolding. Social media was already ablaze. Clips of Leavitt's words replaying on loop, captions screaming disbelief, hashtags igniting. But in the room itself, time seemed to slow. Leavitt crossed her arms, satisfied with her own performance. She thought she had won. She thought she had cornered him into silence, that the absence of an immediate retort was proof of her dominance. To her, this was victory. To everyone else, it was arrogance spiraling into overreach. Because silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes silence is preparation. Sometimes it is the gathering of power, the careful choosing of words that will land not as a defense, but as a reckoning. And the longer Kash Patel remained calm, the more the crowd sensed that something was coming, something bigger than a simple reply. The commentator closest to the stage whispered to her colleague, "If he answers now, she's finished." The colleague nodded, eyes fixed on the man who hadn't yet spoken. And then, slowly, Kash Patel reached forward, his hand adjusted the microphone. The room went still, the hum of cameras the only sound cutting through the silence. Every head turned, every breath held, every heart thudding in anticipation. Narration pressed in, heavy and deliberate. For all her insults, for all her arrogance, Karoline Leavitt had no idea that the silence she mocked was about to end. And when it did, it wouldn't just silence her, it would shake the nation watching. The room held its breath as Kash Patel leaned into the microphone. He didn't rush, he didn't snap. His eyes stayed locked on Karoline, but his tone, when it finally came, was calm, steady, and impossibly controlled. "You just told me to go back to India," he began, his words slow, deliberate, measured. "But my family didn't go back. We built forward, here, in America." The words landed like a gavel striking the bench. The silence that followed was deeper than before, as if the entire hall was trying to absorb what had just been said. Karoline shifted in her chair, the smug curve of her lips faltering ever so slightly. Kash didn't look at her. The silence after Leavitt's insult was heavy enough to press against the walls. The moderator shifted in his seat, fumbling with his notes, desperate for a way to move the debate forward. But before he could intervene, Karoline doubled down. She leaned back with a smirk, her voice dripping with condescension. "See, he won't even answer. That tells you everything you need to know. Some people just don't respect this country the way real Americans do." The jab was sharper than the first. Gasps turned into murmurs. A few in the audience applauded, but the sound was weak, drowned out by disbelieving whispers. Commentators seated on the sidelines exchanged nervous glances. This was no longer a debate they could neatly summarize later. This was political theater combusting in real time, the kind of moment that could redefine reputations forever. Karoline mistook Kash's calm silence for weakness. She mistook his patience for hesitation, and with each passing second, her arrogance grew. She leaned forward as if daring him to respond, her smirk widening, her words hanging in the air like bait. "What's wrong, Kash? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you just don't have an answer." The tension was unbearable. The moderator opened his mouth, then closed it again, sensing that any interruption now would only look like cowardice. Viewers at home sat on the edge of their seats, the collective question reverberating. Would Kash Patel finally break? But he didn't. He sat upright, his expression unflinching, his eyes fixed, not on her smirk, not on the provocation, but somewhere steadier, deeper. His stillness was louder than her insults. Every pause, every breath stretched the moment, forcing the audience to lean in closer. Commentators scribbled frantic notes, cameras zoomed in, and the air carried a tension that felt less like politics and more like history unfolding. Social media was already ablaze. Clips of Leavitt's words replaying on loop, captions screaming disbelief, hashtags igniting. But in the room itself, time seemed to slow. Leavitt crossed her arms, satisfied with her own performance. She thought she had won. She thought she had cornered him into silence, that the absence of an immediate retort was proof of her dominance. To her, this was victory. To everyone else, it was arrogance spiraling into overreach. Because silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes silence is preparation. Sometimes it is the gathering of power, the careful choosing of words that will land not as a defense, but as a reckoning. And the longer Kash Patel remained calm, the more the crowd sensed that something was coming, something bigger than a simple reply. The commentator closest to the stage whispered to her colleague, "If he answers now, she's finished." The colleague nodded, eyes fixed on the man who hadn't yet spoken. And then, slowly, Kash Patel reached forward, his hand adjusted the microphone. The room went still, the hum of cameras the only sound cutting through the silence. Every head turned, every breath held, every heart thudding in anticipation. Narration pressed in, heavy and deliberate. For all her insults, for all her arrogance, Karoline Leavitt had no idea that the silence she mocked was about to end. And when it did, it wouldn't just silence her, it would shake the nation watching. The room held its breath as Kash Patel leaned into the microphone. He didn't rush, he didn't snap. His eyes stayed locked on Karoline, but his tone, when it finally came, was calm, steady, and impossibly controlled. "You just told me to go back to India," he began, his words slow, deliberate, measured. "But my family didn't go back. We built forward, here, in America." The words landed like a gavel striking the bench. The silence that followed was deeper than before. As if the entire hall was trying to absorb what had just been said. Karoline shifted in her chair, the smug curve of her lips faltering ever so slightly. Kash didn't look at her. The moment Kash Patel's words hit the airwaves, the ripple became a tidal wave. Within minutes, phones lit up across the country. The clip was uploaded, clipped, remixed, and shared across every corner of social media. By midnight, 3 hashtags dominated the trending list. Hashtag We Belong, hashtag Kash Patel, and hashtag Go Forward. TikTok filled with quick edits. Young immigrants lip-syncing Kash's words, "My family didn't go back, we built forward," as if it were a battle cry. Instagram flooded with graphics overlaying his quotes on the backdrop of the American flag. On Twitter, or what was left of it, celebrities added their voices. Actors, musicians, and athletes reposted the clip with one-word captions like "powerful" or "finally." Even figures known for avoiding politics chimed in, unable to resist the emotional surge. The momentum was unstoppable. Within 24 hours, Kash Patel wasn't just a guest on a panel. He was a household name, a national symbol of dignity under fire. Commentators across networks debated the meaning of the moment. Progressive anchors praised his restraint, his poise, his ability to transform a racist jab into a statement of belonging. Even a few conservatives, uncomfortably aware of the backlash against Karoline Leavitt, admitted on air that the remark had gone too far. Meanwhile, Karoline became the subject of relentless ridicule. Clips of her smirk played on loop, now set to mocking soundtracks or paired with captions like, "The face you make before you lose the entire room." Late-night comedians wasted no time. Her insult became a punchline, her brand of fearless conservatism, rebranded by critics as reckless cruelty. For every cheer she had hoped to spark among her base, there were 10 jeers drowning her out in the digital square. But the most striking contrast wasn't in the comedy, it was in the commentary from ordinary Americans. Veterans wrote posts about their immigrant brothers in arms. Teachers shared stories of immigrant students excelling in their classrooms. Small business owners, first-generation children, and second-generation parents all echoed Kash's refrain. "We built forward." The phrase became a slogan, a mantra, a declaration that resonated far beyond party lines. One viral video stitched together photos of immigrants arriving at Ellis Island, farm workers in the fields, scientists in labs, nurses in scrubs, all overlaid with Kash's line, When you attack my heritage, you attack the very foundation of this nation. It was no longer just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And yet, it wasn't simply the immigrant community celebrating. Polls taken days after the debate revealed something startling. A majority of Americans, Republican, Democrat, and Independent alike, said they felt proud watching Kash's response. For a nation so fractured, the moment was a rare thread of unity, fragile but undeniable. Karoline, however, faced an opposite tide. Her campaign staff scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing statements that attempted to reframe her words as misunderstood, but the damage was already done. Memes outpaced press releases. Fact checks paled against the emotional resonance of a man standing tall against an insult. She found herself not as the bold conservative warrior she had branded, but as a cautionary tale of arrogance and miscalculation. The more she pushed back, the worse it became. Every defensive interview clip was remixed into satire. Every attempt to pivot only sharpened the contrast between her bitterness and Kash's composure. She was no longer shaping the narrative, she had lost it entirely. And yet, the true shockwave went deeper than either figure. For millions of viewers, Kash's words didn't just defend him, they reframed what it means to be American. Parents played the clip for their children, telling them, "This is what standing up looks like." Students debated it in classrooms. Churches, mosques, and temples referenced. In the days that followed, as the firestorm of debate settled into something deeper, Kash Patel's words began to take on the shape of a creed. He had faced insult with grace, slander with service, and division with dignity. And in doing so, he reframed not just a moment, but a message that echoed across the country. He reminded America of something it too often forgets: that the measure of our belonging has never been about where our parents came from, but about what we choose to stand for. His quiet strength turned into a resounding truth: dignity over division. It wasn't a slogan crafted by consultants or a line rehearsed for cameras. It was lived experience distilled into conviction, spoken at the precise moment when the nation needed to hear it. Commentators replayed his statement over and over. "My family didn't go back. We built forward." In America, each time the resonance grew. For some, it was a reminder of their own family's sacrifices. For others, it was a challenge to rise above the politics of fear and resentment. And for many, it was a spark of pride they hadn't felt in years. Kash's story underscored something timeless: that service will always speak louder than slander. His years of public service, his work across administrations, his steady hand in the face of provocation, all of it stood in sharp contrast to Karoline Leavitt's sneer. He didn't need to shout her down. He didn't need venom to defend himself. He simply let the truth of his journey stand as proof that Americanness is earned through contribution, not ancestry. In his speeches after the debate, Kash leaned into that message. He spoke not only to immigrants, but to all Americans. Whether your family came here centuries ago or just last year, whether you were born in a small town or a big city, whether your skin is light or dark, what makes you American is not bloodline, but belief. Do you serve? Do you give? Do you stand for the values of freedom, equality, and justice? That is what binds us together. Audiences rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes, others with fists in the air. It wasn't just applause, it was catharsis. At a time when the nation seemed split into 1,000 angry fragments, his words stitched something back together. For immigrant families, it was validation. For young people, it was inspiration. For skeptics, it was a challenge to see America not through the narrow lens of exclusion, but through the expansive truth of unity. In Kash Patel, they saw not just an individual standing tall, but the reflection of an entire nation's promise that no insult, no sneer, no attempt to erase identity could diminish the value of belonging. And that was the lesson: that patriotism is not about weaponizing the flag against our neighbors, but about raising it together. That love of country means love of people, all stories, all roots converging into one shared destiny. Kash's answer that night will be remembered not for the insult that preceded it, but for the way it transformed pain into power. He showed that even in the face of cruelty, there is a way forward. by choosing dignity over division, service over slander, and values over ancestry. As the nation reflected, a final truth rang clear. America's strength has never come from the purity of its origins, but from the courage of its people to claim this land as their own and to make it better than they found it. That is the heart of the American story. And as millions replayed Kash Patel's response, one feeling rose above all others: pride. Pride not just in him, but in themselves, their families, their heritage, and their place in the American journey. In his voice, they found validation. In his words, they found unity. And in his example, they found the reminder that, too, the truest measure of Americanness is not ancestry, it is values. It began with a sneer meant to wound. Karoline Leavitt's words, sharp and dismissive, "Go back to India." But what followed was a response that will be remembered far longer than the insult itself. Kash Patel stood tall, spoke with dignity, and in a single moment transformed hate into history. His answer reminded America that belonging is not handed out by gatekeepers of fear. It is built, every day, by those who serve, sacrifice, and believe in this nation's promise. That's why his words landed like a thunderclap. They weren't just about him. They were about all of us. About every family that came here with hope in their hearts. About every child told they don't belong, yet who refuses to give up on the American dream. Kash's response echoed a universal truth. America is not defined by ancestry. It is defined by values. And so, as we close, the lesson is clear. Division can be loud, but dignity will always be louder. Hate can grab a headline, but service will always write the story of tomorrow. And in moments when the nation feels most fractured, it is the voices of courage that stitch us back together. If you believe dignity is stronger than hate, if you believe service is greater than slander, if you believe America belongs to all who build it forward, then this is your movement too. Subscribe now, stand with us, and let's keep telling the stories that remind us who we really are. Because in the end, it's not about where we come from, it's about where we're going together.